Welcome everyone, welcome to the Public Trustees Elder Abuse Awareness Day presentation. And I want to start off by talking about the job of the Public Trustee. So as the Public Trustee, I see some really great things that this organisation does. It does a lot of really important work, ranging from our will service to our financial administration to our deceased state work and many more. But one of the most important work that we do is raising awareness about elder abuse, and particularly helping to prevent financial elder abuse. Now, from where I sit, elder abuse can take many forms. It can involve neglect, it can involve physical abuse, it can involve emotional abuse. And a range of other things. And alarmingly, during COVID, elder abuse, if you read the newspapers, is on the rise. So that's why it's really important to have our speaker today talk to us about elder abuse. And I would now like to introduce all of you to her. So Deanne Lawrie is a project officer with Older Persons Program, as part of the Older Persons Programs with UnitingCare, and she's been there for 11 years. That's a lot of experience there, and in her current role, she works with the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit to help educate the community, and she also works on the Elder Abuse Hotline, helping those who call or call in for help or advice. So she is also the co-chair of the Gold Coast Elder Abuse Response Panel, and the panel takes a multidisciplinary approach to managing difficult cases of elder abuse, and it's got representatives from various government and non-government entities, including the Public Guardian, Queensland Health, and a range of other organisations. So Deanne is a keen advocate of human rights, and she's particularly focused on preventing elder abuse. So it's my great pleasure to introduce everyone to Deanne. Deanne, welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me along today. It's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, so it's a perfect opportunity to come and talk about elder abuse. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do on the helpline and a little bit around what elder abuse is, and then I guess we'll open it up to some questions and some discussion. So World Elder Abuse Awareness Day represents the one day in the year when the whole world voices their opposition to the abuse and suffering inflicted to some of our older generations. That's from the United Nations. So it's a really important day for us. Now, normally we encourage people to wear purple on the day, especially when it's community events, and often people will have like a purple morning tea or something exciting like that. Unfortunately, with COVID this year, we haven't really had a lot of exciting things happening, so we're hoping that next year we'll see a lot more of that. So as was said, I am with the UnitingCare community, and we run the older persons programs, and my role is on the helpline and to do community awareness. So firstly, I want to just talk a little bit about the data that we collect. So we're a confidential helpline, and we produce a report at the end of the year called the Year in Review, and I would encourage any of you to go out and hop on our website and have a look at the Year in Review, because it does really capture a lot of the statistics around elder abuse. And I find it a fairly easy read, so I think I'm not the best at wanting to read lots of data and that sort of stuff. So that would definitely be helpful, I think, if you want to know a little bit more about the stats. But just to give you an overview, so this is last financial year, we had 1,780 abuse notifications to our helpline. Now, 372 of those were where it was perhaps an aged care facility or a neighbour, someone that wasn't related to the older person. We also had 1,408 that were family-related abuse types. And that's the focus we have on the helpline, is around where it's a family member that's inflicting abuse on the older person. Now, the definition of elder abuse, this is from the World Health Organization, is it's a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there is an expectation of trust which causes harm or distress to the older person. So I think that's the key thing that we keep in mind, is that it's very much about a relationship where there's trust. So there might be aged care workers where there's an expectation of trust, but it's not like a family member. So most aged care services, they have a contractual obligation to provide care, and there's still that expectation that they will do the right thing. But with family, it's a very different ball game. So we talk to a lot of people, not necessarily the older person themselves always. Often we'll talk to family members, service providers, and we'll discuss what's happening for that older person. Now, the helpline has very much a older person-centred framework, and no matter who calls us, we're going to be talking about the older person. So one of the things we often hear from people is, I think my mum or dad should do this. And we go, okay, so how do you know that? Have you talked to mum or dad about this? Oh, no, that's just my opinion. So a lot of the decisions that people often want to make for the older person are not based on what the older person actually wants. So we do a lot of, I guess, in that human rights area, and older person-centred work is, what does that older person want? And we'll often encourage the older person to speak to someone independently. And the public trust is a perfect example of that. If you're wanting to do a will or talk about an EPOA, is to come and talk to that person independently rather than relying on family to tell you. And I'm sure you've all seen situations where it hasn't probably been the best situation for the older person. So who are the perpetrators of elder abuse? Now, our stats show that it's about a 50-50 split with sons and daughters, and they're the major perpetrators. We find then that following that there are spouse-partner relationships where there's abuse going on, and then grandchildren are starting to show in our stats.
So Deanne, you might lead into this, but do you find that there's a difference between those different demographic cohorts and the type of
It's a really good question. Yeah, there was a bit of a pattern happening in some of the data where we found that if it was a daughter who was perpetrating, it was often a father that they were abusing, and then vice versa. It was a son to a mum. We haven't found any long-term evidence of that. It's a bit up and down, but there is some information to indicate that. I mean, with most cases, we don't find physical abuse as a high one. Probably perpetrated more by sons than daughters, but it's not a standout either. And as just with COVID, we've also noticed an increase in physical abuse that we hadn't seen previously. So normally physical abuse is around about 10% of perpetrators of abuse types, but it's jumped up a little bit in the last 3 months. So we put that down to people being in close proximity with each other, whereas generally speaking, the financial and psychological abuse is quite common, and it's really split quite evenly amongst sons and daughters and grandchildren. So, but that's a really good question, because we'd like to know the answer to that as well sometimes. So. Now, in terms of the victims, we find that the age group that has the highest number of reports to elder abuse is around between 80 and 84. So it starts around the 50-60 mark and builds up, and then it does drop off again. So I guess that's probably an age group where there are a lot of people in that age group, but they're also quite vulnerable. And then as the age increases, I guess mortality then also occurs. So, but yeah, that age group is the highest for our victims. And with perpetrators, we find between about 50-55 is the average age, well, the highest instances of abuse by the perpetrator. Again, it varies, obviously. There's lots of different perpetrators. So, so just with the relationship to the victim's sons, were 34% this year, and daughters were 37%. So pretty close. And it does seem to change. Some years daughters are higher than sons. So no real clear reason as to why that is. So. Yeah, and in terms, you've mentioned some of the abuse types. So we obviously see a lot of financial, as I imagine you guys would as well. We also see a lot of psychological, and the psychological is often that thing about if you don't do this, we're not going to let the grandkids see you, or we're going to put you into care if you don't pay. I had a call this morning where the older person rang and said his son and daughter were making her pay $700 a fortnight in rent, and the total rent was only $450. So they weren't telling her that, and they were completely ripping her off. So, we see more non-contribution where the older person lets the son or daughter move back in. They don't pay bills, don't pay rent. So the older person's living on a pension and actually paying for the perpetrator as well. So that's a lot of the stuff that we hear. And then with the psychological, as I mentioned, but we have a range of different types of psychological abuse. So it can change. Some of it's that gaslighting where people are making the older person out to sound like they don't have capacity, which is a real concern for us. So we really encourage people to have a good relationship with their doctor so that they can get an assessment done and say, look, I've got capacity, because it's taking someone's finances is not a very good thing at all, but undermining their sense of who they are is even worse. So if I was to say, I think you're losing it, how would you feel? You wouldn't feel good at all. So we try to really reassure people that they're not losing it, that they've got capacity, and that they need to go and talk to their GP and have them confirm that for them. So now the other types of abuse, so physical, as I mentioned, there's also neglect, which you'd mentioned, and the other two that we don't hear about as much, but I think are really important here. One of them is social abuse. Now, we often see social abuse as the starting point for elder abuse. So the older person either moves in with the perpetrator or the perpetrator moves in with them, keeps them quite isolated, stops them, other family members contacting them. So they'll say, oh, mum's asleep, that sort of thing, or moves them out of town so they can't have access to their family or friends. We see quite a bit of it when people move into aged care and the enduring power of attorney decides that no one else can visit, and there's no reason for that. There's no legitimate reason, and the older person's got the right to see whoever they want to see, unless that person's causing them, putting them at risk. So we often see that when we're talking to the people on the phone, it's if you're noticing that social abuse, there's probably the other abuse types happening, financial and what have you. But it's really important for people to identify that early so that the financial stuff doesn't happen. And we'll talk to people about, because often people are very reluctant to go and talk to the older person or the perpetrator when this is happening. So we encourage them to try and get together as a family and go and talk to that person, so it's not as intimidating. They're not going to be put off by talking to just one-on-one with, especially if it's the perpetrator involved. So one of the things, and the other one I want to briefly mention, and it's not one that comes up a lot on our data, but it's one we're finding is for a lot of older women is quite an issue, and that's the area of sexual abuse. And a lot of the ones we hear about are cases where it's like a housemate or a stranger or a neighbour, that kind of thing, and sometimes in aged care, but a lot of times in the community. So really needing to consider if someone's exhibiting unusual behaviours and they're not comfortable with who they are, or they're saying unusual things, that perhaps something like that has happened. So in an intimate partner relationship, that may be the case. You might see the financial abuse side of it, but often if there's other abuses happening, if there's physical abuse happening, then sexual abuse can be an issue as well. And we've been doing some work with the Gold Coast Sexual Assault Service, and they do some really specific stuff around older women and supporting them. So just really like to bring that to people's attention. So they're the abuse types. So
I've got a copy of the review. That's what it looks like. So it's a great report. So what about, Deanne, in terms of, I suppose, the communication involved and the challenges with that communication? So obviously you would need to get through to older Queenslanders in terms of the key messages, but obviously to their family and support networks. And is that also challenging in terms of perhaps reaching different demographic groups? So I'm talking, for example, people of non-English background and those type of groups.
Definitely. I mean, we've haven't done a lot of work with the culturally and linguistically diverse community, but we have done, I think in conjunction with the public trustee, we did some videos that promoted having discussions about who you want to make decisions for you, and if you're going to sign documents, to make sure see a solicitor before you sign them and things like that. So we've used that medium to try and get to the called community. With the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, we've done, last year we actually travelled to the Torres Strait to do some work up there as part of a domestic violence conference, and we found that there was quite a lot of obviously domestic abuse in the community, but then abuse with the elders. So we're starting to try and
which is really significant from a cultural perspective.
Oh, definitely, because especially when you're talking about domestic violence, and a lot of the community is saying we need guidance from the elders, but if the elders are being abused, then that's really difficult as well. So we've teamed up with Department of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs to do some work in Mount Isa, the Torres Strait, at Cherbourg, and also in the Brisbane area, just to basically, because we're not experts in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues, but we need to link in with those communities and try and build their understanding of what abuse is, and that it's not okay, but for us to also understand how their family networks work as well, so we're not coming from the wrong perspective when we're dealing with people in those communities. So. So the other areas that I guess we have a big, I'd call it a big grey area, is that of capacity. And a lot of times, especially when we're talking to the family of the older person, there's a real, there's a tendency to go, I don't think dad's got capacity, or I don't think mum's got capacity. And I think there's a lack of understanding about what capacity is. So a person may not have capacity to draw up a will or to write up an enduring power of attorney, but they've got the capacity to decide where they want to live, to look after themselves, who they want to see, those sorts of things. So a lot of conversations we have are around that person's capacity. And it's very easy to take a third party's view of capacity and say, oh, well, that person hasn't got capacity. But we want to shift back to, well, where's the evidence to say they haven't got capacity?
Yep.
So when people start giving you examples, you go, well, we all forget things, don't we? I can put my keys down and forget where they are. Just, if I'm 80 and I do the same thing, doesn't mean I don't have capacity. So it's kind of around that older person's rights. And the other thing is, a lot of families really struggle with sending the older person or leaving the older person in a risky situation. So if you think about domestic violence, the victim has the right to decide when they want to go. Now, that doesn't mean they don't get support, but they've got the right to decide. So we don't say we're going to go and drag that person out of the situation, because it's not our place to do that. But unfortunately, when people become, get to 80 or 85, they go, I can't really make that decision anymore. And oftentimes they can, but they don't want to. And we've had lots of examples where an older person might be living with their only child. They might be from another country, so they've got no other family at all, very little friends. They're living in a situation where the person's not being the best to them, but they're not being terrible. And a lot of times we hear where people want to step in and remove them from that situation, but that's not always the answer. So one of the examples we had on the Gold Coast panel that I work on was where a son he was living with his mum. They were from overseas, had been through quite a traumatic experience, and he was having issues with alcohol use and that sort of thing. So he kept putting their accommodation at risk. So the police, when we discussed this on the panel, instead of just removing the son, which the mum didn't want, they put a domestic violence order in place saying he wasn't allowed to cause issues, and if he did, he would be removed. And they also set up financially that his money would automatically go to be paid for the rent, so he wasn't forfeiting on the rent. So that person then had a safe place to live, and that's really what they wanted. And they didn't want to lose that relationship. So this is the biggest thing. If you have a stranger come along and take all your money, what are you going to do? Probably report them to the police. But when it's your son or daughter doing that, you're not going to do that. So we talk a lot to the family and to the older person about what they want. And we'll often say to the person, we know you love your son, we know you love your daughter. And they usually do. But they also have the capacity to say to us, with quite a few expletives at times, but I don't really like what they're doing to me. And that's a really powerful thing, because oftentimes they're not going to say that to their other children. They don't want to admit that maybe they were wrong about Johnny and that, he is ripping them off. So our work is to kind of get that person to a place where they accept that it's not their fault. That's really important, that they're not to blame for it. And that also, if they want assistance, that then assistance is available. And so that can take quite a lot of time for someone to get to that point. And a lot of us get quite impatient at times because that person's not doing that, particularly family members. So it's really important that the older person has information and support. They're the key things, because you need to have knowledge of how things are going to pan out before you make a decision. So if you say, well, just get out of the house, they don't know where to go. Older women have the highest rate of homelessness in Australia. So a lot of these situations with domestic violence and elder abuse are, in a sense, then they remove themselves from that position but then become homeless. So there's great services around the state that will help people to get assistance with this that are face-to-face. So there's organisations like the Seniors Legal and Support Service that are in a number of places throughout Queensland, and also Relationships Australia have an elder abuse prevention and support service as well. And between those two services, they provide face-to-face support for older people. So our job, we're definitely not experts in finance or law or anything like that. Our job is as a first point of contact to hear what's happening with the situation, ascertain what the older person wants, which can be really difficult when it's not the older person you're talking to, and then look at what options might be available. And sometimes simply giving that person a contact phone number can be the best thing to do, because then they can reach out and get help. Because if you don't know where to get help, you don't know, do you? And what we often see is the perpetrator will tell the older person a lot of lies. So, because I've lived here for 10 years, I own half the house, which I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that's not true, is it? So they're the sorts of things that the person starts thinking, oh, well, I can't sell because I'll have to give half to my son. So it's clearing that up and getting the right information, and that can help the person to make a good decision as well. So that's what we try to encourage, that you've got a right to make a poor decision, but as long as you know the information, and that's the tricky part at times. So the other thing we hear a lot about, and I'm sure you guys see it as well, is around the role of the enduring power of attorney. And obviously there's a financial attorney, and then there's a health and lifestyle attorney or personal attorney. A lot of the problems we see is where someone has a financial attorney and they think they can make decisions about personal matters for the older person. So we spend a lot of time explaining to the person, well, this is not really your decision, and what evidence have you got that mum or dad can't make that decision. So, and one of the things I think we really need to consider too is that sometimes there's relationships between each individual child and that parent, and they're all very different. So my relationship with my mum might be very different to what my sister's relationship is, and we've got different ideas. And mum's probably going to want to keep both of us happy to a degree and want us to get along. But at the end of the day, it's what mum's decision is that's important, not what my thoughts are or my sister's thoughts. So that's a lot of the work that we do, is around having those difficult discussions and encouraging people to try and have those difficult discussions with their families if they can, but that's not always easy. No. So that's sort of the role of the helpline.
Great.
Yeah.
So that's really important, really worthwhile, and it does sound challenging at times. Yeah. No, very good. All right, well, thank you so much. That was so insightful. Now, do we have any questions from people listening in and people in the training room? Yes, we have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you make that delineation between it being elder abuse versus domestic violence situation.
Good question.
Is it just age or?
Yeah, so the difference between elder abuse and domestic violence, so it is a really difficult thing to do, because there are some situations where it's been long-term domestic violence. So just because a person turns 65 doesn't stop being domestic violence. And this is the thing that we have to be really careful of. Sometimes we label inappropriately. And do want to jump back to the sexual abuse stuff as well. We'll often say if an older person's assaulted, it's elder abuse, but it's sexual abuse. We need to really be clear that it is domestic violence. So in our data that we collect, we will note that it was a domestic violence situation, not an elder abuse situation. But if it's a new relationship, so the person's lost a partner or just separated and remarried, and it becomes abusive, well, that would still be classed as domestic violence. It is elder abuse in a way, but we really still see it as domestic violence. So.
Yeah. Great. All right. Any other questions?
Oh yes, I just wondered, do you have any behavioural information as to what the factors are that lead to elder abuse?
I'm probably not the best person to ask that. We do have a research person who probably has done a lot more work in that area, but I don't think there's a really clear answer either. There's a real lack of research in the elder abuse space. So I guess a lot of what we see is often with domestic violence, it's power and control for the sake of it. Whereas with elder abuse, often there's power and control because they want the money. So the motivation is often where the perpetrator might have a gambling problem or an alcohol problem, or they just simply don't have a lot of money and they think, well, I'm going to go and ask mum and dad. So the motivation is a bit different. It's not just to control the person, it's actually the means to an end. So often, but it is a really good question because we have expanded our database and we do collect a lot more information now about the different behavioural patterns. One of the things we have is like failure to launch. So there are some people that have never left home. So they've got this dependency on their parents and there's this perception of entitlement. It's my money. So when you've got, say, 3 siblings and one's never left home, it gets really messy because the person that's living at home says, but we need the house. And, but yeah, it's like, well, and that's mum or dad's decision as to who they leave the money to, but it gets pretty messy in those situations.
And what about, you've been in the sector for some time, so what about, from your perspective, what do you see as the risk where agencies, government and non-government, don't collaborate with each other?
Yep.
And can you think of a strong example or a clear example of where you saw government and non-government getting together, working collaboratively together to really address
it's a really good question. I think oftentimes what we do see is we send someone to one service and they get a certain response, but then they don't get it in the other area. So one of the things we've seen with the Gold Coast panel that we run is that we are getting services to work better together. So one example, without sort of giving away much information, you have a perpetrator who might be living with the older person and they might have some criminal offences. So the police can step in and take action around that, and that will sort of assist the perp to leave the older person's home or things like that. So oftentimes what we've seen is where the courts, for example, they'll make a decision around the older person because they're deemed to be safe in an aged care facility, but the perpetrator can still come in and perpetrate abuse. So they don't take out the DVR. They say, no, they're safe. So when courts and police and aged care facilities would work together and that information shared, there's a much better decision often made for the older person. So in the case with the Gold Coast, there's been a few situations where there's been aged care services involved and there's been the police involved in Queensland Health and community services. So there's that response where, the police know that this is what's happening, so they can maybe, just keep an eye on that perpetrator, or if the person presents to hospital, there's a response from the hospital. And then, like there's one particular case, it's a couple where there's been long-term abuse, like over-medicating the person, and going to court, the courts didn't sort of appreciate the background, so they were like, no, he can have access to visit the wife in the aged care facility, whereas she didn't have the capacity to stop what he was doing to her. So, I think definitely when we communicate with each other and we have that better understanding of what's happening, then and some areas do it really well. There's some regions where there's already services building up together, and like police and health are working well together, and others obviously need a bit more work. So we're really interested in however we can to try and support that for communities.
So for an organisation like the Public Trustee, the importance of collaboration with all our stakeholders, customer representatives and NGOs, but also within our organisation, all parts talking to each other. All right.
But I've just had a question come in from Lisa, and it says, I have a client that's non-verbal and in a wheelchair, and her daughter takes her funds. What should I do in that case?
Okay, so in this case, I mean, if you look at capacity, the person may well have their cognitive capacity but not be able to communicate that. So according to the public guardian's definition, then not being able to communicate would mean that they wouldn't have capacity. So in that case, I would suggest they probably contact the public guardian. But if the person's able to communicate that in some way, it may not be verbal, it might be by typing an email or whatever, writing down, then they've still got capacity. So we've got to acknowledge that. So then again, it would be reaching out. So perhaps the worker themselves could call us and talk about some options. It's hard to know, depending on the older person's capacity, as to exactly what might happen.
But I think the general rule is if you suspect, it's best to report and it's best to seek advice. So if there is that suspicion, or if you are unsure, there's the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit, there's the Public Guardian and the Helpline and all of those important forums. So,
And I think what I'd like to stress is that we often get callers who just want to debrief about a situation because it really is difficult at times. You might say, they haven't got capacity, and they might meet all the criteria, and it's easy to go to QCAT because the person's got all the information, but sometimes people don't have that. So, and what's safe for the older person. So sometimes the police going in can be a great option, and other times it can be the worst thing that you could ask, and because sometimes a public guardian might not be able to get there. So it comes down to risk as well. So I think, but definitely not, you've got to follow it up some way. So.
Great.
We've just got another question here. Says, what do you have to say about the importance that you pay to the adult's views, wishes and preferences about the allegations? Because often the PT comes in after the opportunity to obtain a reliable view might have been lost.
So is that if the older person may not have capacity, or?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Look, we have this, and I think the public guardian do, possibly the public trustee, whereas there's a presumption of capacity until proven otherwise. So whilst the person might not be able to manage their funds, they might be really clear about who they want to live with or who they want to see in their life and what they want to do. So we always err on the side of, well, if they've always wanted that and now that they've lost capacity and they're still saying those things, then we really should be listening to that older person. And it isn't, I don't think it's black and white, but I think we do have to err more on the side of let's listen to what they've got to say and weigh that up and then see whether, for someone to say, I want to go and live at home when they can't care for themselves and they don't have the funds to be at home and the home's already been sold, there's not much you can do. But we've had people ring from dementia wards that have got capacity. How did they get in there? So we do have to listen to that older person. We'd rather get it wrong, like assume they've got capacity and then find out that no, they haven't and they've been probably ringing us unnecessarily. But we'd rather do that than go, oh no, they just haven't got capacity. Like, it's much better for us to take that road. So.
I've just got one more here from the people on Skype. It says, does the Elder Abuse Prevention unit get involved in institutional abuse, that is where no personal members are perpetrators, but there may be an issue with a particular institution?
So I probably need to clarify, we are a confidential anonymous helpline, so we're not going to report anything that we're told. Like, we will encourage people to go wherever needed be to report, because we want people to feel safe to ring and talk about anything. But if someone was worried about an institutional situation, then we would refer them on to the Aged Care Complaints Commission or ADA Australia, depending on the situation. But we're not going to be able to act on it ourselves, but we're going to really work out a way for that person to get some assistance. So.
Great. All right, so we might end it there. Thank you so much, Deanne.
Thank you,
That
I
was
appreciate
really helpful and really important from many perspectives. So the key messages being that this is a prevalent issue. It's a serious problem that we all have a role to play, and that if we suspect or are concerned, we should seek advice and report. And otherwise, look, thank you so much. That was wonderful. For everyone, thank you for conferencing in, Skyping in, and also for the people coming into the training room today. But that's it for today. We really appreciate your time. Stay safe, and please ensure that you remain aware of this important issue and act accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks very much.